Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, tariff talks. President Trump meets with India's Prime Minister Modi at the White House. A new Trump executive order has the Commerce Secretary going country by country to determine the need for, quote, fair trade tariffs.
If you build here, you have no tariffs whatsoever. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think our country is going to be flooded with jobs.
Meanwhile, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. sworn in despite millions spent by opposition groups against his nomination, and Senator Mitch McConnell siding with Democrats. RFK Jr. takes the helm at the Department of Health and Human Services. And Vice President J.D. Vance in Germany, the Vice President and Secretary of State land in Munich for a major security conference just hours after a car slams into a crowd, injuring dozens of pedestrians. What we know about that attack and the VP's visit. But let's start tonight with CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro and CBS News Chief White House Washington correspondent. He's everything. Washington encompasses everything. Major Garrett. Major, what do you make of what's happening in Europe?
So the statements from the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, yesterday set off alarm bells throughout Europe and Ukraine. No NATO membership, and regaining territory lost during the annexation of Crimea in 2014, unrealistic. Just can't really do that. Basically taking two things off the negotiating table. He walked them back a little bit today in remarks to say if that exactly is the president's negotiating position. And then the president said, I don't disagree with anything that Pete Hegseth said. And by talking to Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader first, and then Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president second, President Trump has clearly indicated who he thinks will decide the terms of settlement of that war, the aggressor, Russia. But does that leave Ukraine in the cold? We don't know yet. The president is sounding as if it won't, but that doesn't mean anxiety already high in Europe isn't higher.
It does seem, Major, that this is a deal that could be cut by Trump and Putin, not by Trump, Putin, and Zelensky.
It could be, but Zelensky has said, you can't cut a deal. You can't disarm us. You can't stop us from fighting. We're the ones who were invaded. We have legitimacy, we have sovereignty, and we have our future to consider. All of those things are real. However, they are stalked and shadowed by the reality of how much money will the United States provide, how much will the Europeans provide, how many drones, weaponry, machinery to fight a war will you possess and for how long? That could not fatally, but dramatically compromise Ukraine's ability to say, no, you can't do anything without us. That's what Ukraine and the rest of Europe fear, and that's not an unreasonable point of anxiety.
We're also tracking the presidential meeting with Modi. What do you hear about how the president is going to handle that with the prime minister?
White House officials told reporters today that one of the priorities is a, quote, fair trade deal. That kind of is in opposition to the reciprocal tariffs announcement that was made today and some of Trump's past comments saying that India is a, quote, big tariff abuser. But the other thing is the defense. One of the White House officials really said that the relationship between America and India is, quote, one of the most critical bilateral relationships in the 21st century. And just because of the proximity to China in that region, defense agreements was a big topic that White House officials previewed, at least, would be a big topic of conversation.
So I just got off the phone with Senator Ron Johnson, who's very close to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Republican from Wisconsin.
Sure.
And he says RFK Jr., now that he's confirmed, is going to go right after what Johnson called corporate capture on the health care front. And you really see a disruptor now taking the helm of HHS.
So the Wall Street Journal about 6 weeks ago had a series of stories about Medicare fraud, about doctors, hospitals being paid way more and using the system to suggest that they were providing services that they weren't, all sorts of misuse of the Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement system. Look, if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and those who he designates goes after things like that, that will be of true and lasting service to the American taxpayer and to the healthcare system in our country. If he does, we'll see. He talks a lot more about areas outside of HHS purview, the foods system in our country.
He's talked about having partnership with agriculture.
Yes, but you need to forge that partnership, and you need to take on that industry. We'll see. He now is empowered by the confirmation process, only one dissenting vote, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. He is where few people would have imagined he would be 6 months ago, running one of the largest, most important agencies, with tentacles and regulatory powers that touch almost every part of the American economy through healthcare.
And you pair what RFK could do with what Doge is already doing as well. They pretty much got the green light, per se, from an executive order President Trump signed earlier this week, saying that federal agencies should work with them for, quote, large-scale reductions in force. We know that Doge employees have had their hands in some sort of way in these agencies. So certainly a space to watch there.
It's so interesting that RFK Jr., as a former presidential candidate, I've been told by sources that President Trump sees him as partly responsible for his own victory.
Absolutely.
Because that bringing in that MAHA coalition.
He's the only person in the Trump cabinet with a subsidiary, full-standing political, not operation,
but a movement,
but vitality all of its own, separate from Trump, that Trump has to pay attention to, use, harness, and draft off of.
And Trump likes that name, the Kennedy name. And the Kennedy family, of course, some people don't love that RFK Jr. is in the cabinet. Let's listen to President Trump on tariffs, what he had to say about that.
India traditionally is the highest, just about the highest tariffed country. They charge more tariffs than any other country. And, I mean, we'll be talking about that. But, again, whatever they charge us, we're charging them. So it works out very well. It's a beautiful, simple system.
So you had the president there talking about tariffs once again. Is this a negotiating tool or something else? Because I keep hearing that Trump often talks about tariffs as a way of pushing people to move on their position in terms of economic negotiations. But is this something he's really going to be unmovable on?
We know just from his campaign that reducing trade deficits between the U.S. and other countries was a big priority. What I thought was interesting about the order today is it's telling his economic team to start looking at countries. It's not tariffs right away. There's a soft deadline of April 1st. They will investigate the countries that they feel need to have this sort of balance and reciprocal tariffs initiated. And I think that gives countries time to maybe make some negotiations, some counteroffers to the United States. Even though Trump says there are no exemptions, I mean, we could potentially see some positive talks out of the meeting with India today. So certainly provides a timeline for them.
Aaron is absolutely right on this soft deadline, and the markets in New York reacted very favorably. As soon as they heard, oh, it's just a study, and there's 180 days, and maybe April 1st at the beginning, all the markets went up. They were sort of hovering at basically doing nothing, and then boom, about 300 on the Dow. The assumption is that it is exactly as you described, Robert, a way to negotiate. But it's not just tariffs. It's other things. Value-added taxes, a very big thing in Europe. Fees that you assign for importing or exporting. Lots of different ways to toggle our trade partners in ways to make things more beneficial for U.S. exporters. We have about $1 trillion trade deficit. Let's just take India, for example. Its tariffs are about 9.5%. Well, we charge them about 3.5%. If you equalize those, then that's possibly more revenue for the United States, but possibly India doesn't trade as much or goes elsewhere. The Trump theory is that no one will go elsewhere because this is the biggest, most important market in the world. Maybe yes, maybe no. One thing we know for certain, the Fed has made it clear it's not going to reduce interest rates anytime soon because inflationary pressures remain real, even without tariffs. And if tariffs do in any way, shape, or form, even at the margins, increase inflation, that's going to be harmful not only to the economy, but to one of the president's biggest campaign promises, reducing the cost of living for average Americans.
Major Garrett, Aaron Navarro, thanks for stopping by. We appreciate it.